to Studio with your local lay Dominicans. We'll be discussing some of the gems we discovered in our studium, where we share the fruits of our contemplation and the joy of the gospel message. Representing our St. Albert the Great lay Dominican chapter and co-host of today's show are myself, Cheryl Drozda,
Jeff Drozda,
Matthew Mayer.
And today we're going to be talking about a heresy. And I don't know, just to help you get an idea of what this heresy has at its root word, Gnosticism is the heresy, and gnosis is the root word of that, which is a knowledge. So what this comes from is the idea that there are some people who have a secret knowledge. And so if you think of like maybe Star Wars, where the Jedi have this secret knowledge that they can, and they're a superior group, right? They are the ones that kind of handle everything. So I'm just giving that example because it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around this whole heresy. So we're going to try to do that. Matthew's here to help us. And Matthew, give us some real life examples of historical Gnosticism, secret knowledge type groups.
Well, I mean, I guess you can say we can start off with the obvious, the Gnostics, where they had their influence came from Plato and it came from Plotinus as well, and they used that they used a lot of Platonic and Neoplatonic philosophy to come up with their idea, mixed with perverted Christian doctrine. You see a lot of Gnostic gospels like the infancy narratives of Thomas and the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Judas, etc. And they basically had the secret knowledge of what Jesus said in secret, and that they can able to spread what Jesus was teaching behind the apostles. And so how the Gnostics would think is go back to Neoplatonic philosophy. They have the one emanates aeon in a realm called the plethora. And one of the aeons, his name is Sophia. Then apart from the other aeon, Sophia decides to emanate an aeon outside the plethora, and this aeon becomes the demiurge. And this demiurge, because he was made outside the plethora, he's actually basically corrupt because he's made in somewhat of matter, and so he made some other creatures who went against him, and so you could say he made the earth, and he ends up ruling the earth as a corrupt being. And this demiurge is going to be identified by the Gnostics as God of the Old Testament, where he's corrupted. And the serpent, who is Satan, we all know that. He ends up rescuing Adam and Eve by giving them the secret knowledge from the apple, or not the fruit in the garden. And then later, in vengeance, the demiurge decides to kick them out because God of the Old Testament is a jerk. And so
and that's what they believe. This is sort of the background to Gnosticism, their creation story of sorts, right?
Yes.
Their distorted creation story.
And so there's this superior aeon comes. He's going to be Jesus. Jesus is the good God. God New Testament is good, stops the old God. And so that Jesus is going to be the good God because he wants to be all nice and tries to save people from the flesh to become just pure spirit. And so you can have a lot of Gnostic influence in today's media, where you have Satan as the good guy who wants to stop the tyrannical God from basically telling people what to do. And so that idea has been influenced to Manichaeanism, which then later, where Gnosticism used to say matter was just imperfect, Manichaeanism say matter is complete evil, where you have pure spirit as good and pure matter as evil. And so you see a lot of polarization where they do that now, where people divide one against the other, saying we're the good guys, you're the bad guys. You see this in politics. You see this in any conflicting social groups. And so they have that high and mighty mindset of our secret knowledge, where because we know the secrets, we know better, we become the elite. It's a lot of elitism right here.
So the lesson learned is that when someone says this is a secret and only a special group of people know about it and we'll tell you about it, but the rest of it is secret, red flags should be going up all over the place. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
A lot of it does affect us today. Yes, it does come. I wouldn't say today they practice Gnosticism in its historical sense, but they have that Gnostic mindset, where it's basically we know better and we are the good guys, and if we are the ones with the secret knowledge, that means we are the ones who can't do wrong. We're doing the right thing, so don't question us.
And so even in some of our more modern, history, you mentioned the Illuminati earlier to me as one example of like a secret society that.
Well, Illuminati is a little bit of a tricky one because a lot of conspiracy theories are revolving around that. A more accurate one would be actually the Freemasons, who were highly inspired by Neoplatonic philosophy, and they basically kind of add the same things to it. The idea of God as a grand architect and who has to shape a lot of geometry involved. A lot of that comes from Plato. And I forgot which one of his works, but he
And
talks a lot.
Pythagoras. Yeah.
Well, Pythagoras too. It's actually a lot of Neo-Pythagorean mysticism in Freemasonry, and before that there was also the Cathar heresy, which surprisingly was becoming really strangely relevant in the future. The Cathar heresy, which started in the Byzantine Empire, but then migrated to southern France in Albigenses area, where where the Albigensians actually adopted it so they could rebel against the king who they were in conflicts with at the time. And since he had strong ties with the church, they decided to rebel him by rebelling against the church by becoming Cathars, which involves seeing the flesh as intrinsically evil. A lot of sexual excess involved in it, but at the same time they had a really negative view in the flesh where it involved ritual suicide as part of the Cathar heresy. And so this is where the Dominicans actually first show up, where where Saint Dominic tried to stop the Cathars, and eventually led to a crusade, but a crusade that failed. But the Dominicans did establish the medieval Inquisition, which is when the Inquisition first actually showed up in the world, and they used the Inquisition to actually finally suppress the Cathar heresy and stop everyone from killing themselves, and that actually strangely even applies to the modern world. An example would be Heaven's Gate, where they have I forgot his name, but there's a very disturbing looking cult leader who is telling everyone that aliens are gonna come and then later lift them from their flesh, like flesh gonna be shedded off, have a spiritual transcendent bodies, and they're going to go and to heaven. And Jesus was an alien that was sent down to give them this secret knowledge, and then in the end they committed suicide. And that's an example of Cathar, the ghost of Catharism actually coming to haunt the modern world. And so you'll have examples of this in cults, where basically the Cathar Gnosticism is going to mostly be found in cults, where you're going to have people saying, we have the secret knowledge, we know what to do. And so lesson learned is basically when someone says, I got an idea that can't be proven wrong, it's not falsifiable, so it's going to be right, beware, he has a Gnostic mindset. It's apocalyptic, basically. It's trying to reach the end of history.
And that was an amazing thing you drew together, that this can be on a lot of different sides. So some people think this is one-sided thing, but it's really on extreme sides that don't have that unification that is part of body and soul, right? That the body and soul are unified and they are both good. And also that includes everybody. So at the end of the Fatima prayer we were talking about, we pray for all souls to go to heaven, and that is our faith. And so to kind of give an overview of what we're saying, the Christian view is that God created the world good, it got messed up, and God is going to redeem the world, all the created world, our physical, and spiritual created world. And then the Gnostic view is that, no, the world is a cosmic disaster. The goal is to escape this world and return to a heavenly realm. And the way that this happens is from a secret knowledge that some of them actually claim comes from Jesus, but we know that that's not the case.
A lot of it actually comes 400 years after Jesus.
Right.
And actually even Plotinus, who was alive during the rise of the Gnostic heresy, he was actually against Gnosticism, and he was explaining how Platonic philosophy can't actually match with Gnostics, where they say the world is actually just a reflection, the matter is just a reflection of its spiritual reality. They said they say the spirit is good, then that means the matter, the world itself, the physical world, should be a reflection of that which is good. So you can't really call the matter evil if it's supposed to be a reflection of what's actually good. Now he says that he does separate. He was teaching from a Platonic idea. He does say that matter is imperfect, but that's just Plotinus. He was just trying to explain how Platonic philosophy doesn't match with Gnosticism. It's a self-defeating heresy. But if we were to speak like Thomas, where he takes a lot of emphasis from Aristotle, he says that the idea that like St. Thomas Aquinas, again taking off from Aristotle, would say that matter isn't evil, but rather is it's actually the I guess the cause, the material cause necessary for that formal cause to exist. But that formal cause also needs that material reality to exist as well. It's a one-on-one thing. They both depend on each other. So spiritual matter actually needs the physical matter, and physical matter needs the spiritual matter to actually exist. So so they can't be both evil. One can't be evil or the other. They're both good. So when God created the world, He really made it good.
Right. Matter is good. Sin is bad. Right.
Yes.
Sin is bad. So we want to go into why this matters to us now, because that's a very interesting like background and history, and it sounds kind of crazy, but it's really applicable today, and something that being aware of helps us not to fall into those little pitfalls, right?
Yes.
So what would be some of those pitfalls that people fall into? I think you mentioned that one is just being drawn to having that secret knowledge. I mean, as humans, we just want to be on the inside, the inner circle and that secret knowledge. And sometimes we can reject things that we shouldn't.
Well, I guess you could say what can always start off with the secret knowledge is always a sense of self-righteousness. Because when the idea of saying, oh, I think I know the truth now and no one else does, that just undermines the magisterial authority of the church, where Jesus presented the apostles to teach all that he taught them publicly. He did teach them privately, but at the end of his life he said, now that I have resurrected and will go to the Father, now is the time for you to teach this publicly. And so they would have the doctrines made public to everyone, so that they may all believe. And so when everyone thinks they have secret knowledge of what Jesus really meant or what he really said, the idea of this is the real truth, everyone else was just telling a lie, it's always self-righteousness, because it means I reject the authority that Jesus has granted unto me.
Yeah, and I think, in our society, and of course, throughout all history, people are yearning for something more. Because, you can have all the power, you can have all the money, but you're always yearning for something more. And your heart is restless unless it's, rest in God. And, and that's, you look back in the times of St. Augustine and, the Manichaeans and talk about some, very odd
Sounding
and very, I guess, how would you say, rituals or dogmas of I have the figs or feed me the figs. And if you're reading
that's from Manichaeism.
if you're reading the Confessions, then you know a little bit about that. But you have all these very odd and strange teachings. And once again, Jesus said, beware of the odd and strange teachings that are out there, and there's been many of them. And I think a lot of that boils down to people who are just trying to find happiness. I mean, maybe that's where it boils down to. I don't know, but they can't find happiness unless they find it in truth. And of course, that's in Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit.
So I think what I tried to say was esotericism, where they were trying to have this mystical knowledge that they were trying to bring them to transcendental happiness. And I'm beginning to see a rise in this, and I think other people have been noticing this as well, where they were saying atheism is dying because a lot of people have grown bored with it. It's they were so materialistic, so atheistic, that they actually grew tired of it because because like you said, people are striving for more, and atheism hasn't promised that more because it has deleted mysticism from their life. So that's why you see a rise in occultism, where a lot of people are now playing with tarot cards and trying to use magic crystals and trying to seek fortune tellers, clairvoyance, whatever they're called, and Satanism even, because they're trying to reach that mystical knowledge and yet at the same time reject God, because apparently Christianity's mysticism involves carrying a cross, which actually which pretty much integrates all of life's meaning and happiness into all of life's suffering. And so I guess you could say a lot of people are turning to occultism because they don't want a mysticism that involves the cross.
So we have this swing from this materialistic idea and to the spiritualized idea, completely spiritual, and again, not integrating those two, which is what Christ did for us, right? The incarnation is, and we can participate in his divinity, but our body is good and our soul is good, and that's what the point is. And some of the other ideas of, I think you mentioned the doomsday idea is also just over thinking and worrying about things that are material too, right?
Yes, and unfortunately, that also affects a lot of American politics as well. Trying to keep this, I'm trying to keep this subtle here, but at the same time, trying to get the idea of what I mean. One example would be the idea that everything is a social construct, that we can try to construct it to make a better utopia, because my truth is the higher truth. It's relativism, basically, trying to transvaluate all values, as Friedrich Nietzsche said, but he tried to do that to oppose Christianity. Jesus did that as well, but he wasn't. But in the sense of trying to return the world back to to what it was meant to be, where people were meant to be living in love, while Nietzsche was talking about living in power, and you see this in the idea of relativism, where we try to create a more equitable, egalitarian world by transvaluating everything to where we all have equal amount of power. And then later you see that pendulum swing to the other side as well, where they have the idea of the kingdom of heaven is not here. We must go and try to establish the kingdom of heaven, which you'll find a lot of Christian reconstructionism as what's called, I think, the social gospel maybe. But what is definitely affecting it as well is the Christian fundamentalism, with the idea that the rapture is coming, and so we must be able to use American military force to come and try to start these foreign wars so that we can bring the kingdom of heaven, which they deny being the Catholic Church because they don't believe it is a Catholic Church. And since they don't, that means the kingdom of heaven is not here because it involves Jesus' presence. Every presence in the church is a spiritual presence, but here in Catholic Church, he's actually there in the Eucharist. But they know kingdom of heaven must mean Jesus must be actually there. So since they don't believe it's a Catholic Church or even an Orthodox Church, it must be no church. Kingdom of heaven is not here, so we're gonna bring it here, bring in the end times, start these wars. Then later we finally have the kingdom of heaven come. Then there'll be peace throughout the world. And it all comes from, I guess you could say, it all comes from denying the Eucharist as the true body and blood of Christ.
That's exactly the case. You're listening to Studio to Studio, and we are your Third Order Dominicans, your lay Dominicans here in Lafayette, Louisiana, and we come to you every Thursday at 4 p.m. on FM 90.5 and 99.5, and on AM 1230. And so we are being able to come to you thanks to Sign Lumber with locations throughout all of Acadiana. And so if you have not driven off the side of the road and trying to wrap your head around Gnosticism yet, and you're still with us, we thank you, because we were talking about, how people are really searching for more, and we see it, throughout all of history. And you had said, sometimes people turn to the dark side, another reference to Star Wars. But and of course we look to the saints. I mean, we have saints who have turned to the dark side, and matter of fact, we're going to have a new saint, Saint Bartolo Longo here, and he was in the dark side, but thanks to the Dominican priest and the Blessed Virgin Mary, he came back to the Catholic Church. And before we did our little advertisement, you were mentioning how focus on Christ in the Eucharist is the antidote, and I think trying to find what the antidote is to Gnosticism, to all these heresies that came to us throughout all of history and are still with us. So what are the other antidotes? What can we do to overcome Gnosticism in our society today?
Well, trust our father of Western philosophy, Socrates, who says that what I know is that I know nothing. So basically, that's the big antidote right there to Gnosticism, which involves self-righteousness. Socrates has shown it's humility. That's the one big antidote for Gnosticism. Probably the primary one is to actually admit, I know nothing. that you have. I don't know everything. I'm not. There are probably other people in the world who know better than I do. So that's one. That's like
So
that
humility.
humility right there, and Jesus has shown humility as well. Friedrich Nietzsche has actually said that humility is basically the idea of the is basically an idea of weakness. It says you need to have to show assertive authority. Well, I don't think that's actually what he was writing, but but the vibe I get from reading his works is basically the idea that I know better. It is the Zarathustra, the Superman, Ubermensch is gonna come because he will take over all Christianity, which has been a show of weakness, basically. That's basically so. Yes, he was going against humility by showing Christianity as a religion of weakness. And
Who was that again?
Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche. Okay.
And so he was actually Eric Voegelin. He was actually warning about Gnosticism affecting politics. He used Friedrich Nietzsche as an example. He used Karl Marx as another example, and George Hegel as another example. And he was basically saying that all these men have is the idea that we can take all these truths, make them subjective, and try to reach a higher knowledge. And later we can try to create a utopia by creating these new values, these new truths, transvaluation of all values to the idea of saying what I know is the correct answer. It's what I understand about it. I am the hero of this story. That is pure egocentrism, and that's when Eric Voegelin had to say, do not eminentize the eschaton, basically, which means is do not try to bring about the end. Don't be apocalyptic. It's basically to be a Gnostic today in the world is to think apocalyptically.
And if you think about things like transhumanism that are happening, this you can maybe see this in what's upcoming, right? The idea that people can surpass, transcend their own capabilities by this combined artificial intelligence, also just outside of their bodies type of things. This whole idea of transhumanism, I think, might demonstrate, I guess, an up-and-coming problem with a Gnostic philosophy.
I guess you could say because a lot of the idea of transhumanism is the idea that we can shed our human bodies for a more artificial intelligence body. Problem is that even if you did do that, even if you do have our cyborg body, even if you do know all the knowledge of the world, the one thing you don't have is the beatific vision. Basically, you still need God, because even if you were to have all this knowledge of the world, the fact that you still don't have God can put a really deep hole in your heart, because your heart is a divine-sized hole that can only be filled with divine grace.
Wow, that's a good point.
And of course, our bodies will be resurrected. I mean, so, for those people who are looking and saying, well, the body is bad and whatnot. And we, throughout all history, we see that, whether it's Puritans or other sorts of sects that are referred to the body as bad. But, once again, Christ had a body. Christ died on the cross for us. And, as I think one commentator said, is that, if we were to, believe that the body was bad and whatnot, then, then the incarnation would be totally a heresy. I mean, it would be a fallacy. And of course, that's not the case. So, there is that balance of body and soul. And I don't know if, Pope John Paul II, with his theology of the body, I don't know if that was an attempt, by him to say, we need to come back to having an understanding of the blending of the both. You have to have both. You have to have the body and you have to have the soul. There's a lot of talk on, of course, the soul, and it's not being imprisoned in a body, but they go hand in hand. And I don't know if that's something that Pope John Paul II was trying to get across in a time where in time and history that maybe it was needed, and of course more and more we learn more and more about that every day.
And I guess you can say is that Gnostics actually have taught that Jesus was just I guess you could say was just a illusion. He's a spirit. He wasn't. He was there, but he was just spiritual,
like a ghost.
Basically, the body of Jesus was just an illusion. But he was giving the secret knowledge. But then I had to. This is like a really dark thought right here, but at the same time, there's a little flashbang of lightness at the end, where Jesus' body, he's subject to death, and as a lot of Gnostics have thought, well, the body's evil because because it can die. The only difference is Jesus did die, but then the flashbang of light comes right after that, where after he dies on the third day, he defeats death by coming back. And that's what the Gnostics can't teach, the defeat of death, because Jesus had to have a body to die, but that's the only way you can confront death, and that's the only way you can confront death, to defeat it, so that way Jesus can resurrect. They don't have the victory of the resurrection because Jesus didn't have a body in Gnostic theology. In Catholic theology, Jesus did have a body, and with it, he used to die, and that's the only way he could defeat death, was to die and come back.
Yeah, the first born of the dead.
And you mentioned, Jeff, the resurrection of the dead, which a lot of people do struggle with. I think, especially if you're very science-minded, you're like, how does this happen? I would recommend, there's some videos that Bishop Barron has done regarding Gnosticism where he talks about this, and he answers a question of a caller about her doubts in the resurrection. And he says basically that every 5 years, our cells in our body are new. They're not the same, but that's still our body. And we have this he said that if we can understand that we're constantly regenerated, we're constantly a new thing, but we're still our body because of our soul is united with that we can understand maybe a little bit better that when we've been died and buried, that there's a new way of it coming together, but it's still our body. It may not look exactly the same. It may not be like picking up every piece and sewing us back together like what we have a hard time wrapping our minds around. But with God, all things are possible. And so it's just something beyond what eye has seen and ear has heard. So,
But be warned, even if you are against Gnosticism, it can still affect you because not naming people. We can name, let's say, we can have Catholics out there who can say, they basically all revolve around Vatican II, where you do accept it, but then you go so far as saying this is the spirit of Vatican II, even though this is not exactly what Vatican II has taught, but it's basically the idea of, I know it because I have a better understanding of Vatican II, despite what the fathers of the church have tried to say. And then later you have the people who are against Vatican II, who then go and say, "Oh no, I have the better knowledge because this is actually what the fathers of the church have always taught." Despite the fact that the fathers of the church now, being a continuance of the fathers then, are trying to again saying that they're being misinterpreted of what they meant by the church to be. It was never meant to be a hermeneutics of disruption, as Pope Benedict I think called it, but rather a hermeneutic of continuation. The church had to go through a little reform to adapt to the modern world, but at the same time was never meant to undermine its theology or its liturgy. But I guess you can say all the chaos you're seeing going in the church now, you can lead it back to Gnosticism. It's basically not. They think that the devil has taken over the church. I think a more narrow view to say would be the devil through the form of Gnosticism, where basically it's affecting Catholics who are for and against Vatican II because they want to have the higher knowledge of it. And I guess you could say Vatican II is pretty much a victim of bullying now from Catholics of all people.
Well, I think when we talk about modernism, modernism has been an issue in the church for almost a minimum 200 years, and so that's if you look at the writing of Pope Leo XIII and popes afterwards, they would address modernism, and it's amazing how things change, but you know what, they always stay the same.
So remember to stand firm in the absolute truth, Jesus Christ, because only the truth bears grace.
Lived through time, passed through fire, broke my heart, wounded desire, changed my life, fixed the past, stared at death and it stared back, standing fast in the light of the word. A shotgun blast was the last thing I heard. I rattled in the wind like a window pane. My soul's alright, but my body...